Good afternoon and welcome to Te Committee Tāiao, the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee. What we'll do first is open with our karakia. So can we please have the karakia on the screen? Please feel free to join in. Toru wha, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. We're now moving on to our apologies for the meeting. I've received 3 apologies from Councillors Shaw, Rashid and Deputy Mayor Lewis. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. All in favour, please raise your hand. I declare that carried. Today we have no public comment. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare from members? I take that as a no. So now we're moving on to our first substantial item, which is an update on Council solid waste and minimisation work. I welcome Dill, our solid waste manager, to speak to the item. Please take the report as read, Dill. If there's anything else that you would like to add or highlight, please do so now before questions.
Thank you. There's one thing that I'd like to add, which I was asked before to update the committee on with regards to the timeline for the education campaign. I've got some visibility of that, and I can share that timeline afterwards in written form. We've selected the agency. They're going to do some scoping work over the next 3 months. And that involves research, contacting residents to understand the recycling habits. After the scoping and research, we'll get into some strategy and development of creative and collateral. And it's looking like by end of August or early September, first week of September, we'll have a campaign live in market after development. And as I said earlier, I'm happy to share the timeline later on. With everyone. I don't have any further updates or any changes to the report as it was submitted.
Thank you, Dill. Any questions from members? First, we've got Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Edwards, then Mayor Barry.
Yeah, Dill, just addressing first the education about contamination. Will that be begin with a general kind of campaign across the whole city, or will we be targeting some of those suburbs that there's a graph that shows contamination by suburb, which results are kind of a little bit surprising, but you know, will we be running messages across the whole city or targeting those, you know, suburbs that are well above 20%, some of them?
Across the whole city, the overall marketing comms campaign will be across the whole city. We are doing 2 things simultaneously, albeit the recycling ambassadors, which is a slightly different thing than the marketing campaign. The recycling ambassadors will start mid-May, and they will be doing a targeted drive to open up the lids and checking for contamination, recording that data, feeding it back to us, and which will be helpful in the development of the strategy for the marketing campaign. We envision that the recycling ambassadors will be in play in market for about 3 months to give us a comprehensive data set of the contamination by material. What you see on the graph is a high level representation of contamination. And the recycling ambassadors will help us to get some metadata on this representation, which will include which are the suburbs and what are the problem areas in those suburbs, including streets, but also drill down to the materials of contamination.
Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, thanks. Same topic. Oh, well, before we leave that one, I presume we'll be first off with these ambassadors targeting those suburbs which this high level data show us appear to be the worst, and they are some, perhaps you could say, surprising suburbs. But my question, given we have this disappointing 17% contamination rate, what is happening with the recycling material currently? Is some of this as a result of that contamination ending up in landfill? Is Waste Management saying, okay, this is above acceptable levels, it's the whole truckloads off to the landfill?
No, Councillor. The threshold set for any material diverted or not diverted going to landfill is at 20%.
20%.
And we are getting close to that, and hence now from mid-May, we hope that we start sending the message out that there will be recycling ambassadors on the streets of Lower Hutt, and we are hoping that that message will contribute towards self-moderation of some behaviors, even though we will take some action later on in the next 6 to 8 weeks to issue red stickers and not emptying bins that have high contamination. But at least the start of the process will start sending some messages out.
Mayor Barry.
Thanks, Dill. You may have answered, I think you've answered one of my questions, which was just around getting that breakdown of what the actual contamination is. So, but do we have a general sense that it is really an education issue of people recycling the wrong materials rather than a dumping issue of waste into the recycling?
Largely, it is about confusion. It's not done with total intent that I want to do the wrong thing and I'm doing the wrong thing and I know about it. We don't think that is as big of an issue, although there will be some instances where that might pop up. I'll give you an example of what happens in Porirua is they only recycle and accept 1 and 2. They don't do 5, number 5 plastics, and we accept 1, 2, and 5. So within these neighboring territorial authorities, there's a change of what council accepts in the recycling bin. And we can just imagine the confusion of the resident. What should I be doing to recycle the right thing? So there's a lot of confusion. There's some ignorance about it. And largely people are doing the right thing. We just need to get to those who we need to convert to the right behaviors.
What do you, I suppose, what would you class as a like if you've got a contaminated bin, is that basically you fill up your yellow top bin and there's light plastics in there that shouldn't be in there, that aren't 1, 2, or 5. And there was, what's the level, what do we class as sort of contamination, or is it sort of, is there a threshold with an individual bin or pickups, if you know what I mean?
Yes, we have a guide of the levels of contamination that we have to refine to hand out to the recycling ambassadors so they can go out and make those decisions correctly to tag the bins, which is going to be important. But also there is 10% leverage for residents, because 10% contamination is accepted at the facility level. So it's not that we are asking for squeaky clean bins. There will be some soft plastics that, yes, if we pick up the lid and we see 1 or 2 items, it's okay, because 10% is okay. But what we are finding in some instances, anecdotal feedback and through our contractor, is that some bins exceed 20 to 30% contamination. And that is just material that just should not be in there, carpets and animals and all of that sometimes.
Okay, thank you. And just my other question was, or maybe just some feedback. If I recall correctly, I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, we did ask for that information that you said you'll send through around the campaign and the education and the timeline. I think that was it the last committee meeting we asked for that. So there has been quite a bit of time. I mean, I really did expect to see that in here as it came through, and just making sure as best as possible if we can get that sort of information reported through to these committee papers, because it's also important, you know, these are public papers. It's important that our community is able to see them, not just an email later on to elected members.
No,
Right.
absolutely.
Sure.
Alan?
Thank you.
Just to speak to that, thank you, Mayor Barry. Yes, indeed, we can get you that information and put it into the next committee paper. It's we haven't had the capacity in-house to actually do the campaign with our own existing staff, and so we've gone to an agency, and that has taken a little bit longer than we had expected, but we will get that information to the next round.
Thank you, and even having a paragraph which explained that in this paper would have been, you know, would have dealt with it as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Barry. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. The questions I have is also around the contamination, but I have got a question on the total volume of recycling tonnage and percentage in contamination by month. Is that graph saying that we haven't actually increased our recycling by much, or am I reading that wrong? Since
Yes, you're right. The recycling, curbside to curbside recycling has not shifted by that much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Also, the areas by suburb, I'm really pleasantly seeing that Taita, Nainai and Wainui aren't at the top. When there's been when we were working towards this, there was a lot of generalizations about who was dumping and where it wasn't working and why this wouldn't work. So it's nice to see that it's not the spread we thought it was, but I do question that, is that only taken off 2 samples? You've got that graph based on 2 samples per
Yes.
suburb.
Yes, there are some suburbs in here that have been tested more than 2 times, but this graph represents all the suburbs that have been tested at least 2 times.
Okay. And one more question is that when you've brought in the ambassadors and education, has that made significant difference in other areas, other councils? And have you got an idea of what the other councils are like, that do similar with their contamination rates?
We've been talking to Porirua Council, who have implemented this
Apart from
policy.
Porirua, but yeah, okay.
Yes, recycling ambassadors do help, and that's exactly why we are doing this initiative.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Mitchell's got another question.
Yeah, and it's on a different topic, which is the procurement of the contract for operating the landfill. And in paragraph 6 there, it talks about how decarbonisation will be part of the assessment criteria, which is great. That paragraph, though, kind of talks about incentivising the bidders to deliver on council's emissions target for 2030 or 50%. And I wonder, you know, are we just incentivising them to deliver on it, or can we write a expectation or requirement into the contract?
Councillor Mitchell, I can answer that question. So the procurement has got a 10% weighting towards decarbonisation. However, when we go through the evaluation, of course, they are assessed on a range of criteria. So think about a scenario where someone might get 100 points as an example on every criterion except decarbonisation, and another operator might do really well on decarbonisation, but be a bit more average on all the other criteria. So when we mean by incentivizing, yes, it incentivizes them to put a decent proposal forward on this particular aspect, be that electrification of the fleet or otherwise. But if they are not doing so well on other criteria, then it might still be the case that they won't be the successful party. So it's not an absolute fail criterion where if you don't do it, you automatically just get eliminated. So it's more of an incentive than an absolute backstop mechanism.
Councillor Mitchell again, do you have another question? You're muted, Councillor.
Just a follow-up question, thank you. And I understand all of that in terms of choosing a provider, but I guess my question pertains more to the contract itself. Once we've chosen them, you know, will there be an expectation, a clear expectation in the contract for them to aim for a 50% reduction by 2030? Because ultimately our council is responsible for those emissions and they're managing this on our behalf.
Yes, absolutely. So in the same way as we're doing it with the curbside contract, where we have incorporated the requirement to electrify those vehicles. So they didn't just get evaluated on those aspects. It's part of the contract. I absolutely foresee that will make its way into the contract as actual requirements. So that means supplying emissions data every year at least once, and then implementing the measures that have been put forward as part of the procurement.
Great, thank you.
If there's no further questions, I move the recommendations on page 6 that the committee notes the update on the various solid waste management and minimisation matters. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Mayor Barry. Is there any debate? No, then put the vote. Please raise your right hand if you support the motion. I declare that carried. Now moving on to page 11. Ewan, you can stay with us, please, for the update on Council's climate change work. Once again, take the report as read. If there's anything that you want to highlight, please do so, then we'll ask some questions.
The only key thing to add to the report in front of you is that paragraph 14 talks about the Stokes Valley charging units being underway, and I'm informed that it's close to completion, so I'm expecting those to be live within the next week or so. The car park itself, the line markings won't be in place probably for another 4 weeks because that'll be subject to the traffic committee recommendations being adopted by council on the 24th of May. So there will be a bit of time between when the units are live and when the car park line markings have been adjusted. But apart from that, for all practical purposes, we're pretty close to that being completed.
Thank you, Ewan. Any questions from members? Mayor Barry.
Ewan, thanks for the report. I wondered if, so I know there's a little bit of information here around sort of where the 20 electric vehicle charging stations are at, but whether or not we can just have a little bit more info of, I mean, I just sort of imagine like a bit of I'm not trying to create more work, but a small spreadsheet which just shows each location and maybe the status of where they're at. If that sort of information might be quite helpful for the committee and good information for us to be able to go back to residents with, because we do have questions asked. If that's okay for maybe a following committee to pull that together if it's not too much of a burden.
That's fine, that's easy to do. I mean, clearly there is, so the sub-traffic committee has the remaining locations in it, but we can bring that into this committee. And just so everyone is aware, Seaview is obviously finished already, it's open. Stokes Valley will be open within the next week or so. And then there are another 4 sites to come, and that includes the Walter Nash Stadium. There's 6 units going there, 5. Moira Library, 2 units. Wainyamata Hub, that's a total of 9, and at the Avalon Park a total of 9 as well. And that includes DC and AC. So that includes the units that we're rolling out as a council through Meridian, and also Meridian co-locating AC charging stations at those locations. So there's another 4 locations to come. They won't be in until later this year. The first ones off the block will probably be Walter Nash and Moira, and that's purely driven by us waiting for the units to arrive from overseas by September, and then they can go in. The other 2 locations are more subject to timeframes around when the transformers can be put in, and that might be closer to the end of the year.
Cool. Thanks, Ewan.
Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, thanks, Ewan. There's a wee note in there to say that there haven't been any more LED streetlights put in since January. That may, is that a we've run out of money, we've run out of resources, the contract is not available, or that was always the plan and we start again on the program in the next financial year?
I'll refer to my colleague Bob on this particular question from the transport team.
Hi, Councillor. Yeah. So was that a question to do with the possible delay of the construction due to COVID impacts?
Sorry, Bob, could you give a bit more detail as to the rationale of the delay? Is it due to materials or due to staff contract shortages?
For the LED program. Yeah, Bob. Yeah, my apologies. I sort of got delayed on the internet a little bit. Yeah, so for the LED program, that because there was a funding cut towards end of the last financial year, so therefore that there's some funding limitations about the new LED programs be rolled out. However, so from starting of this year, then we have post the new LED program implementation for the rest of the financial year to June. So we're not doing any new LED program implementation, but at the same time, and then for any broken or maintenance street lights that we're renewing that LED at the same time that we are developing a program and submit to Wakakotahi for the new financial year. So the LED program will be able to continue in the new financial year. If that makes sense. Yep.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Any further questions from members? No. I move then on page 11. We note the various climate change work streams. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Any debate? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, just a brief comment and a note of thanks as always to the officers for their report, and great to see all the progress that's being made. And there are a number of projects in the paper here that we've been talking about for a long time and had a lot of detail on. I was struck in this report though in paragraph 7 about contract negotiations and how we're now told all contractors delivering services valued at over $250,000 that they'll need to report to us annually on their carbon emissions, which is another great initiative to see. So I'd just like to acknowledge that. And it struck me that I don't think that we require the same necessarily of our own CCOs who are dealing with budgets much bigger on behalf of our residents too. So I know that's business for a different committee, but carrying that thinking over to our own CCOs, it would be really good to see some clear reporting from them as well.
Any further comment?
Just a comment, I think it's an excellent point and one that we could look to report through to both of them. But I think that's a really good point. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Barry and Councillor Mitchell. Yeah, I agree that it's for us to have a clear picture of our own total emissions as a council organisation through our contractors and CCO. It's really important we get the data coming through, and in the annual approach as well, we'll be able to truly measure whether we are decarbonising our practice or increasing our carbon. So thank you to the officers for the work they're doing in that space as well. So I'm going to now put the motion. All in favour, please raise your right hand. I declare that carried. I'm now moving on to page 14 for the submission for the Ministry of Environment. Now I'm asking Andrew, if you can join us. Thank you, Andrew. please take the report as read. I know that some members have some feedback as well, but is anything you would like to add? Then we'll go into questions and feedback before we move the motion. Over to you.
Kia ora katoa, thank you for that. So the only difference, or the only change in the submission is a paragraph relating to the Recycle Mate app. Council officers have liaised with the Australian developers of this app, and from what we gather, this could be quite a significant opportunity, not only for the Hutt Valley, but for the Wellington region and also all of New Zealand. And I say that because an app of this significance has taken the Australian federal government 3 years to develop. And so obviously a lot of that work has now been completed, and the app developers, who are a non-for-profit organisation, certainly appear keen to expand into New Zealand. So the purpose of the paragraph that was added to the submission is to highlight the need to the Ministry for the Environment of the need for an app, either the Recycle Mate app or something similar, in order to provide that information upfront to consumers, especially for the likes of a container return scheme and for standardised curbside recycling. I certainly see a need for that. So the point of the paragraph was twofold: is obviously to inform MFE of that need, and secondly, to also inform them that Recycle Mate can be used, at this stage looks likely to be used, could be used in a New Zealand setting.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions from members for starters, and then we'll go into a bit of discussion around any amendments as well. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair, and I do have a few questions and a few suggestions when we come to that part. With regards to the container return scheme, do we have any concerns about the cost implications on our financial model for our curbside recycling system if all those beverage containers are taken out of our curbside system? And, you know, has there been any modelling or any reason for concern there?
The discussion document did not present any analysis pertaining to that very scenario. It sort of made very sort of brief, I guess it alluded to the fact that curbside recycling would be reduced, but then it also said that it provides more options for consumers. So the net benefit would be to consumers. But there was no detailed analysis of kind of what impact the CRS would have on curbside recycling as such.
Feel free to continue, Councillor Mitchell, if you've got more questions.
Thank you. I wondered if officers had thought about and agreed with the exemption of milk containers from the container return scheme. I've seen a few zero waste groups kind of saying, wondering why milk containers aren't included, and you know, is the dairy industry getting a free ride and yada yada. But I just wondered if councils agreed with the position that those containers shouldn't be part of the container return scheme.
The submission was kept at a very high level. We did not delve into the detail such as which items, materials should be included as such. However, I do note that the territorial authorities part of waste mins have submitted a submission where they have disagreed with MFE's stance that milk containers should be excluded.
Thank you. And just one more question for now, if I may, and it's to do with the requirement of all councils to provide curbside food scraps collection, which of course also means for all councils to have something to do with those food scraps. And we're already along the process a little bit of at least thinking about that and looking into that. I was just wondering what the timeframes are under this proposal, and whether those timeframes and our budgeting over the next long-term plan period kind of match up with what the government is now saying to us they might require of us.
Right. Well, going from memory, I believe that the target date set in the discussion document was by 2030. Was a requirement for all councils to have some kind of process for dealing with organics by 2030. The work that officers are currently doing in conjunction with Porirua City Council, I think I'll be safe in saying is that any such, and Ewan or Dill can correct me otherwise, but the work that we're doing with alongside Porirua City Council, I would hope, and I'm pretty certain that we would have a facility in place before then.
You're still on
You're
mute.
currently muted, Ewan.
I can add to that. The work we're doing with Porirua, so we should have a preferred consultant confirmed, and then we will get into the work to assess the options and you know the different aspects of what a service could look like. And I would say that information will really come to council towards the end of this year, early next year, which then links back into the next lead up to the next LTP. So I would say we will have sufficient information to then for you to make some informed decisions in the lead up to the next LTP, which will of course mean that theoretically, if there was support or if there was a proposal for a food waste collection, then it could start as early as 1st July 2024. But of course, that's subject to the business case process for the community consultation engagement, and then obviously procurement. So that would be the most optimistic time frame. Likely we would be a little bit behind that.
Great. Is there any particular feedback that members want to make towards the submission? Happy to take them now and then ensure that they're included in the final submission. Councillor Mitchell. You're muted, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the answers to those questions. That's clarified things. But yeah, there were just a few points, and some of them are quite small from reading through. And one in there that we did kind of indicate our support for the inclusion of liquid paperboard, which I never knew was called liquid paperboard until I read it in there. That's Tetra Pak kind of style containers. That's through the container return scheme. And interestingly, having read a bit more detail, like that item seems to be an anomaly because they're not proposing to collect it at curbside. And I just wonder if we could note that, and that it may actually cause some confusion about what is and isn't recyclable. So either, you know, it should be collected at both points or just at one. A bigger point, I think, for me is that there wasn't a lot of commentary about financial impact on councils. And, you know, this is we've discussed previously when government has kind of mandated that councils must do all these new things, that we would kind of push back a little bit and ask for some financial support. And I think with the food waste processing in particular, you know, there's always an incentive for political decisions to favour cheap options, which aren't always the options that will have the best environmental outcomes. And also we've kind of heard through the Three Waters reforms proposals about how smaller councils really struggle with that kind of level of infrastructure investment. And, you know, for example, you might think that for a small council in the Wairarapa, the cheapest, easiest option might be to truck all their food waste over the Rimutakas to our food waste processing plant if we have one. So I just wondered if there was scope there to acknowledge the financial challenges that some councils may face, and to ask for co-investment in some of the solutions if that's going to deliver the best outcomes. And even I think too some potentially some government investment in localised research to really get to the bottom of what is the best outcome for council by council, because you know, I'm not sure that every council across the country may have the same capacity to figure that stuff out. So yeah, just thinking about that as a broad theme, kind of looking to the government for some kind of investment to support councils to find out what is the best solution for them and to deliver that to their residents. And just one more minor point, and it was to do with that added paragraph about an app, and I certainly support the initiative, and it's great that the Australian government has funded an app and developed one. I chair the Regional Waste Forum, and we've had a presentation there from some local developers of an app, which, having read about them both, sounds very similar. And maybe we could just acknowledge in there too that there may be local providers or a national solution there as well. And just so, you know, we don't just jump to the easiest option there, but could support perhaps local providers in that space. The name of that one is WasteWise, Waste WYZ, if you wanted to name it in there. And that's my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Any other suggestions for changes or amendments? No, so officers, I'll ask that you include the feedback from Councillor Mitchell in the final version that we submit. And we will now move to the resolutions. If we can bring them up on screen, Judy. If you're there, Judy. Well, I'll just note that there's a third amendment which also agrees to include the provided feedback from this committee in the submission. Do I have a seconder to the three motions? Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Is there any debate? Thank you, Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, really just to note that I'm in very strong support of what the government is proposing, and also very supportive of what officers have captured in this submission and those amendments as well. I think these are all positive changes. You know, our recycling system across the country differs a lot from place to place, and this is a lot of it's about standardization, which ultimately will make all of our systems easier for people to understand. Interesting, I mentioned that WasteWise app. They've actually been developing it to work across all of New Zealand with all the different ways that waste is collected. So you can literally go on holiday and check on there if you can put number 5s in or not and still do the right thing over there. But actually standardizing the system is the answer to making that easy for us all. And also for the government to be able to run really effective advertising campaigns when they've got one message to tell instead of this kind of confusing jumble of messages. So I'm really glad to see the Ministry for Environment pushing these changes forward. Because a lot of them we've talked about for a long time, and they're going to ultimately benefit the whole country. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further debate? In closing, I support what Councillor Mitchell was saying. I think the key thing for this is waste is problematic around our country, and there is inequities when where you live and the service that's provided and the confusion that occurs. Residents don't think around which council boundary they live in, and if they change a suburb over and change their city and their whole system changes with them, it's really problematic around keeping people to minimize their waste and retain those positive habits, which hopefully they've already gained. Also acknowledging another submission to central government. We've done a lot this triennium, and it's really important that we continue to influence where we can, and hopefully we can come out with a better system, not only for our city, but the rest of the country as well. So I now put the motions. Can you please raise your right hand if you support it? I declare that carried. Now moving on to page 18 for the Climate Change and Sustainability Forward Programme. So does any member have any questions? There's not much to speak to from officers at this point. No. In that case, I move that it's noted. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Brown. All in favour, please raise your hand. I declare that carried. We're now moving on. I've had no questions, so now we're moving on to our closing karakia. Judy, can you please put it on the screen? Please feel free to join in. Toru wha, unuhia, unuhia, unuhia I te arutapa nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairoa, I te ara takatū, koia rā rongo, whakaaria ake ki runga, kia wātea, ai rā kua wātea, hau pai mārire. Thank you everybody for your participation in the meeting. I declare it closed at 242.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Very good.
Yeah, well done, Chair.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.